"You're useless, Dad. Just retire already and get out of our way." Those words hit me harder than any hammer ever could. I froze in the doorway of my own home in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, hearing my son, Jason, and my daughter, Emily, laugh together as if they had just delivered the world's cleverest joke. The late autumn sun spilled across the living room, highlighting the worn edges of the leather couch I had bought when I first moved into this house 30 years ago. It was a home I had worked for, sacrificed for, and dreamed for, but in that instant, it felt like none of it mattered to them. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to unclench, trying to remember that anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had always prided myself on patience, even when I spent hours fixing their old bikes, driving them to soccer games, or skipping my own lunches to make sure bills were paid. Now, at 72, it seemed that all of it was invisible to them. Before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. I walked past them, my eyes scanning the family photos on the wall, the ones showing birthdays, graduations, and vacations. I remembered every long hour at the factory, every tax return filed, every sleepless night worrying about whether I could keep this house and our lives afloat. And now, those memories felt poisoned by their contempt. I sat down in my study, shutting the door softly behind me. The room smelled faintly of old books and coffee, small comforts I allowed myself after decades of hard work. I pulled out the ledger I had kept meticulously since I was 21, tracking every dollar earned, saved, or invested. My retirement wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, planned carefully, so I wouldn't ever be forced into dependence. Yet even as I stared at the numbers, a creeping unease settled in my chest. My children, whom I had raised with love and discipline, were already scheming ways to spend my savings, to use the home I had built as a stepping stone for their own ambitions. I could almost hear them whispering about Dad's old money and how quickly they could drain it for new cars, vacations, or worse, their relentless shopping sprees. I remembered my own father, a stern man from Des Moines, who had taught me that wealth without caution could vanish overnight. I had vowed I would never let that happen to me, and now, staring at their smug faces, I realized it was time to take control. Not with yelling, not with threats, but with strategy. The house was quiet that evening, the only sound the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rustle of leaves against the window. I closed the ledger and leaned back in my chair, letting my mind wander to the possibilities. Legal protections, financial maneuvers, and clever loopholes, all tools I had learned in years of dealing with banks, attorneys, and small-town regulations. They thought I was fragile, slow, and outdated. They were about to find out how wrong they were. By the time I joined them for dinner that night, smiling and nodding as Emily told a story about her new job, I felt a calm determination settle in me. They had underestimated me, assumed I was a relic of a past generation. But I had a plan, and it wouldn't just protect my retirement. It would ensure they learned the hard way that greed always carries a price. As I reached for my fork, I caught Jason's gaze full of arrogance and entitlement. I smiled politely, but inside a storm was brewing. I would not be dismissed, disrespected, or outmaneuvered in my own life. The coming weeks would be a delicate game, but I was ready to play, and I knew the first move would shock them entirely. The tension in the air was thick, but beneath it lay the calm eye of my strategy. One wrong step for them, one smart move for me, and the entire dynamic of our household and their future would shift irrevocably. I finished my dinner, my mind already running through the contacts I would call, the documents I would prepare, and the timing that would be crucial for success. Tonight, I was the quiet observer, the patient father. Tomorrow, I would become the force they had never expected. Their laughter in the living room faded as I returned to my study, the ledger open again, plans forming like a map of vengeance tempered with justice. One thing was certain. I had been underestimated, and that mistake would be their undoing. The next morning, the house was alive with the usual sounds of chaos. Jason was blasting music in the garage, pretending to work on his car, while Emily was scrolling endlessly on her phone, occasionally muttering about brunch plans and new clothes she needed. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the bitter warmth, letting their noise wash over me without a word. Patience, I reminded myself. Every move had to be calculated. It wasn't just disrespect that burned me, it was entitlement. They believed they could treat me as a disposable old man, dismiss my experience, and take what they wanted without consequence. Emily leaned against the kitchen counter, tossing crumbs from her muffin into the sink as she said, "Seriously, Dad, just relax already. You've worked enough. Let us handle everything now." I studied her, noting the arrogance in her posture, the way she rolled her eyes when Jason chimed in with a laugh. "Yeah, Dad. Maybe it's time for you to finally move to one of those fancy retirement communities. You know, the ones with shuffleboard and bingo nights." I set down my cup, letting the silence stretch. Then, in my calmest voice, I replied, "I appreciate your concern, but I'll decide what's best for me, not you. This house, these finances, and my life, those are my responsibilities, not yours." They scoffed, expecting a fight, but I refused to rise to the bait. Years of raising them had taught me the importance of measured responses. Instead, I quietly excused myself, retreating to my study where my ledger and notes awaited. Over the next few days, the tension grew. They became more brazen, slipping into my office unannounced, poking through files and making comments about how fun it would be to sell the house or dip into my accounts. Each intrusion was a reminder of why I couldn't wait any longer. Their lack of respect was escalating, and I had to respond, not with anger, but with action. I started by reviewing every account, every investment, every property deed I owned. Cedar Rapids had plenty of legal avenues for protection if you knew the system. I contacted my attorney, a sharp woman named Helen Bradford, who had helped me with my estate plan years ago. Within minutes of explaining the situation, she confirmed what I suspected. My children had assumed I was vulnerable, unaware of the protections I already had in place. Armed with this knowledge, I began quietly restructuring my finances. Mortgages could be shifted, assets could be secured, and the smallest legal maneuver could create a domino effect that would catch them entirely off guard. They had laughed at my old-fashioned approach, my frugality, and my overthinking. But every step I took now was like setting a trap that they would walk into without a second thought. The evening arrived, and I prepared dinner, allowing them to chatter about their social plans while I maintained my calm. Jason spilled a bit of juice on the table, shrugging as if it was no big deal. Emily laughed at his clumsiness, ignoring the mess entirely. And then I spoke, my voice steady, almost gentle. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night. About me being useless. Maybe I am. Maybe I've worked hard for decades while you've grown impatient and entitled. But being useless doesn't mean powerless." They paused, startled at the seriousness in my tone. I could see the gears turning in their heads, wondering what I was planning. But I gave nothing away. "Every year," I continued, "I've kept detailed records of everything I own, every account and every property. I've made sure that if anything ever went wrong, my life and my house would be secure. I hope you'll remember that before making assumptions about anyone's usefulness. Actions have consequences, and underestimating someone can be very costly." Emily's lips parted, unsure how to respond. Jason's jaw tightened, but neither could interrupt me. I let the silence linger, a quiet storm gathering before the inevitable. That night, I returned to my study, laying out the final steps of my plan. The legal notices, the mortgage adjustments, the documents prepared by Helen. All of it was ready. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the house settle around me. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was focused, calm, strategic. Tomorrow, they would begin to realize that the person they had mocked and dismissed held far more control than they could ever imagine. And when that first domino fell, the rest would follow. Swift, unyielding, and perfectly justified. The following morning, I watched from the window as Jason left for his early shift at the construction site, his truck rumbling down the quiet streets of Cedar Rapids. Emily lingered at the door, her phone in hand, scrolling through social media, oblivious to the storm quietly brewing inside me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and took a deep breath. Today was the day my patience began to pay off. Helen had emailed the final confirmations overnight. Every account, every property deed, every mortgage adjustment had been executed flawlessly. The legal framework was airtight. The children would wake up tomorrow to find that the world they thought they controlled had shifted entirely, without them even realizing it until it was too late. I picked up my notebook, reviewing the sequence one last time. The mortgage on their dream home downtown had been quietly transferred into a trust I controlled. Their luxury car lease agreements were technically under my name now. Even their small investment accounts had been rerouted to secure the principal. I had played my part as the helpless father for decades, and now that perception was my ultimate weapon. When Emily finally joined me in the kitchen, I smiled politely, keeping my tone casual. "Morning, Em. I made some oatmeal if you want some." She looked up from her phone, distracted. "Thanks, Dad. You're really good with this stuff, you know. All these bills, paperwork, I don't know how you keep track of it all." I chuckled softly, the sound calm, almost soothing. "It's called paying attention, Emily. You'd be surprised what a little diligence can do." Her laugh was light, unaware of the significance behind my words. "Yeah, well, I guess I'm not as sophisticated as you," she said, teasing, but with a subtle edge of condescension. I nodded, letting her arrogance roll off me like water. "Maybe not," I said. "But sophistication isn't the same as control. And knowing where you stand financially, that's far more important than appearances." Jason returned home mid-morning, still wearing his work clothes, wiping sweat from his brow. He flopped onto the couch, grumbling about the early hours. "Man, Dad, you should come with me to the site one day. You'd probably fall asleep halfway through." I smiled politely, masking the thrill coursing through me. "I'm sure you're right, son, but I have other responsibilities. Things that require patience, planning, foresight," he snorted. "Sounds boring." I leaned back, studying them both. "Maybe. Or maybe it's the very thing that keeps you from losing everything you think you own." They both froze. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed their faces. But I didn't push further. Not yet. By afternoon, I had prepared letters and notifications for the bank and the property management companies. The transfers, the alerts, the legal notices, they would all reach their hands tomorrow morning. And the moment they opened them, the illusion of control they had built their lives on would crumble. I knew they would argue, plead, maybe even threaten. But I had Helen ready on standby. Every document was ironclad, every loophole sealed. They had underestimated me for years, assuming that age or frugality equated to weakness. They were about to discover that experience, patience, and a quiet mind were far more dangerous than any temper or tantrum. Evening settled over the city. The house grew quiet as they both retreated to their rooms. I stayed in the study, reviewing the steps one last time. My hands, usually steady, trembled slightly, not from fear but anticipation. Justice was close, and it would be precise. And then I paused, reflecting on how far I had come. There had been nights of loneliness, mornings of exhaustion, years of giving more than I received. Yet, through it all, I had learned that dignity wasn't something you could demand. It was something you could reclaim. even if it meant outsmarting the very people you loved most. Tomorrow, when the notifications arrived, they would see the truth. The father they mocked, the man they dismissed as powerless, had been the one pulling every string all along. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Control was mine again, and their shock would be the first step in paying for every insult, every dismissal, every condescending word they had spoken over the years. And yet, I knew the moment of confrontation had to be perfect, public enough to teach a lesson, private enough to avoid chaos. Timing was everything. Tomorrow would not just be a reckoning, it would be a revelation. The next morning, Cedar Rapids woke to a crisp, clear day, the kind that made everything seem sharper, brighter, and more noticeable. I watched from the kitchen window as Emily grabbed her morning coffee and Jason slipped into his work boots. They had no idea that today, the world they thought they owned was about to shift entirely under their feet. The mail carrier arrived right on schedule, and I held my breath as the letters were dropped into the mailbox. Each envelope carried weeks of careful planning, legal maneuvers, and patient orchestration. Within hours, the truth would hit like a sudden winter storm. Emily opened the first envelope, glancing at it with a slight frown. What's this?" she murmured, tearing it open. Her eyes widened almost immediately. Jason, curious, wandered over. "What is it?" She read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "This is a notification from the bank. It says here that the mortgage on our house has been transferred to my dad." Jason snatched the letter, scanning the fine print. "Wait, this can't be real. Dad, what the hell is this?" I remained calm, sipping my coffee. "I'm just as surprised as you are," I said, letting the words drip with casual innocence. "Seems the bank needed someone trustworthy to oversee things." "Trustworthy?" Emily's voice cracked with disbelief. "You mean you tricked us?" I leaned against the counter, letting my eyes meet theirs. "Tricked? No, I've just planned ahead. You see, every payment, every account, every property deed was handled quietly. The question is, did you think your father was powerless?" Jason's face reddened, a mix of anger and confusion. "You can't do this. This is our house, our life. We've worked for this." "And yet," I interrupted gently, "you mocked me for being old, for being out of touch, for needing to manage my own finances carefully. You said I should be in a nursing home, that I was a burden. Funny, isn't it, how perspective changes when reality hits?" Emily clutched her chest, her voice trembling. We didn't know." I shook my head. "No, you didn't, and that was the point. You underestimated me. You assumed age meant weakness, that patience meant submission, that quiet meant ignorance. But planning, foresight, and a steady hand can achieve more than any tantrum or condescension ever could." Jason's fists clenched. "You'll undo this, right? You can't just—" I smiled, calm, measured. "Oh, it's all legal, Jason. Every move was approved, every form notarized. Helen made sure of it. So, no, I can't just undo it." Emily sank into the couch, silent, stunned. Her designer coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. I didn't move to help. Let the mess be a small metaphor for the collapse of their assumptions. I continued, my voice soft but firm. "You thought you controlled everything. Money, property, status. You thought you had me figured out. But life has a funny way of teaching lessons. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the cards." Jason's voice was sharp now, trembling with fury. I raised a hand, stopping him mid-rant. "Regret, perhaps. But remember, I didn't take anything you worked for. I simply reclaimed what was always within my reach. You see, I never stopped working, never stopped planning, never stopped protecting myself. And today, that protection comes full circle." Emily finally spoke, her voice small. "But how did you even—" I smiled, letting the silence linger for a beat. "Patience, Emily. Observation. And a little understanding of how systems work. Mortgages, trusts, deeds, banks, accounts. They all have rules. Rules you didn't think I could master. But I did. For the first time, I saw the weight of comprehension hit them. Shock, disbelief, and the sting of their own arrogance painted their faces in a painful mosaic. And as I watched, a small, satisfied smile tugged at my lips. Justice wasn't about revenge for me. It was about reclaiming dignity, about showing that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. The next moment, the mail carrier delivered another stack of notices. Investment account adjustments, car lease transfers, all confirming the extent of their sudden loss of control. Jason sank into the couch beside Emily, stunned into silence. This is insane, he muttered. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the moment settle. Perhaps, but it's also entirely deserved. And tomorrow, when the town sees the legal notices, the reality will be even clearer. You underestimated me. And you will learn, finally, that pride and disrespect have consequences. And there, in that quiet Cedar Rapids kitchen, I realized the reckoning was only just beginning. By mid-afternoon, the small-town grapevine had begun its work. Word spread quickly in Cedar Rapids when neighbors noticed the official-looking notices taped to the front door of Emily and Jason's house. The sight of the bank seal, the mortgage transfer confirmation, and legal notices drew small crowds, curious eyes, whispering neighbors, and a few acquaintances who had once watched my quiet life and assumed I was powerless. I watched from my own porch across the street, a warm cup of coffee in hand. The wind carried the faint smell of fallen leaves and distant smoke from a neighbor's grill. There was an odd serenity in the moment, a calm I hadn't felt in years, even as chaos unfolded next door. Jason stormed out onto the driveway, papers in hand, his face red with fury. "Dad, you have no right. This isn't over!" I stepped off my porch slowly, meeting his gaze. "Right? Jason, I've had every right all along. Every payment you thought you made, every signature you thought you controlled, I ensured my presence, my name, and my legal claim were always secure. You simply didn't pay attention." Emily appeared behind him, her voice shaky. This isn't just about the house. It's about everything. You've taken control of our lives." I shook my head gently. "No, I've restored balance. You thought age made me weak. You thought greed and arrogance could blind me. But I learned patience, study, and planning. And today, you are reminded. Respect is never optional." A neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, from 2 doors down, leaned over the fence. "Well, I never thought he'd do it. But it looks like he really did, Emily. You should have listened to him years ago." Emily's face turned pale, realizing the public nature of the humiliation. Cedar Rapids was a small town. Everyone knew everyone's business. And soon, the whispers would grow louder, the lessons more painful. Jason's fists shook at his sides. "This isn't fair. You can't just—" I held up a hand, steady and calm. "Fair? Jason, fairness is a concept often abused by those who ignore wisdom. Life isn't about entitlement. It's about action, patience, and foresight. You mocked me, assumed I was obsolete, and believed my years made me powerless. Today, you see the truth." Emily's eyes welled with tears, the reality finally settling in. We thought we were smarter. We thought we were ready for everything. But we didn't see you. We didn't see your strength." I sighed, a mixture of sadness and relief. "It's not too late to learn. But first, you must face the consequences of your actions. Your arrogance, your disrespect. They brought this upon yourselves," Jason muttered under his breath. "We'll find a way to fight this." I smiled faintly, serene. "Perhaps. But remember, every move you make must contend with legal documentation, careful planning, and truth. And truth always finds a way to prevail." The town slowly gathered, neighbors nodding, murmuring, witnessing the poetic justice unfold. I saw nods of approval, silent commendations from people who had quietly respected my work ethic, my calm demeanor, and my quiet perseverance over the decades. As Emily and Jason absorbed their new reality, I felt a deep sense of relief and satisfaction. Not bitterness, not cruelty, just the peace that comes from standing tall, having your dignity restored, and knowing that patience and foresight can protect what is yours. I turned back to my house, the porch light warm against the setting sun. For the first time in years, I felt complete. Not just victorious, but whole. I had faced betrayal, endured disrespect, and navigated the treacherous waters of family greed. And now, I had reclaimed not only my property, but my peace of mind. Emily sank onto the front steps of their house, head in hands. Jason paced angrily, muttering under his breath. And as neighbors whispered, I realized the lesson was already spreading. Disrespect has a cost. Arrogance has limits. And patience combined with planning is a power few truly understand. I took a slow sip of coffee and whispered to myself, this is the balance, the justice, the life I've fought for. The town would talk about this for months, maybe years. The children who mocked, disrespected, and tried to diminish me had finally learned the hard truth. A father's wisdom. Patience and quiet strength can outlast pride, greed and arrogance. And with that, I finally smiled, watching the sunset over Cedar Rapids. My life, my dignity, and my peace restored. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.